Hello, hello, and welcome back to the overview of the world system of bondage and separation from life from Kenneth Scott of the House of Cousins and some other contributors at the Pantera de Oro Private Society who make this document publicly available on their website, which is gemstoneuniversity.org. And if you are watching this on YouTube, you can find part one read by me, Keegan, on my Facebook, which is Keegan Bliss Tears Mead, Meade. Or you can go to gemstoneuniversity.org and get the download. I'm just looking at a page of gemstoneuniversity.org right here. On my screen, it looks like the full page for part one on Facebook only. It cut off most of the page, so you're only just seeing the top left. But I'm still providing this audio on my channels because this formed the foundation of kind of my journey into researching the real life matrix and going on a quest to achieve freedom, as Kenneth Scott, the author of this document, calls it, freedom absolute, meaning we create our own reality and play by the rules which come from us as the divinely connected beings which we are, rather than playing by the rules of a religious, political control and dominance based structure that has spread its tentacles over the world. And I'm going to go and describe these tentacles. So we're going to come to part two, the implementation of full containment. The transition of de jure government to a corporate services entity that was later defined as a municipal corporation per the Clearfield Doctrine began with the first Civil Rights Act in 1866 that established the civil body within the federal jurisdiction and was locked into place with the Act of February 21st, 1871. That established such a municipal government for the city of Washington, District of Columbia. For a full list of the key events of this period, see Part 13. The United States Incorporated was put into bankruptcy on March 9, 1933, also detailed in Part 13, after which a new system of legal construction was begun that was to be built over the following decades to bring about the creation of monetized debt and commercial systems within the context of what is discussed above, and under a system of full military occupation, martial law. Law and equity became fused in the hybrid system centered within codified rules of civil procedure, so that the legal and judicial system morphed into a system to protect the interests of the ultimate holders of beneficial interests, the Federal Reserve and its private owners, against the pledged securities of the people, lands, properties, and labor of the nation. This system is known as the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure, FRCP, the foundation of which established the fusion of law and equity, as it had been first implemented by the Judicature Acts of England in 1873 and 1875. This is summed up in Rule Number 2 of the FRCP that states there is one form of action, the civil action. This clearly indicates that although law and equity are present in appearance, character of their full content, The system henceforth is about the containment of the population within the civil body in federal jurisdiction for the administration of the ongoing bankruptcy under martial authority and military occupation, and lacks the true substance, nature of law and equity. This was advanced with commensurate systems adopted in each of the newly created state of states, which were set up as corporate subdivisions of the United States. So I'll take a side note here because I don't know if it's going to explain it, and it will clear it up. State of, like the state of California, the state of Washington, state of Oregon, state of Nevada, starting from the west. All the states have their federal jurisdiction, which is state of, rather than the California Republic. So that's the grammatical structure behind this corporate overlay onto the original governance structure in the United States of America. So they were set up as corporate subdivisions of the United States, now to be managed as a debtor in possession in bankruptcy, with each successive level and layer, from state to county to city to municipality to individual franchise, as being subdivisions thereof. Each one of these has some form of codified system of civil procedure. Ultimately, they are all about one thing: the management of the monetized system of commercial paper that bonds each participant as a debtor facility. A very neat linguistic trick to confuse and misdirect the people is done by the definition of something called "in this state" and "in the state," and variations thereof in different states. It all seems innocent enough if one is dealing with a legal issue in California and sees those phrases. It would be simple enough to assume that meant one was within the proper state of California. But California state is not the same as state of California. So he's explaining it here. Nor is either of them the same as state of California in all capital letters. When one is operating within the civil containment field of the latter and comes across the phrases quoted above, one is actually within the civil containment field of federal jurisdiction as herein described. To confirm this, we find at California Revenue and Taxation Code, section 6017, that "in this state" and "in the state" means within the exterior limits of the state of California, and includes all territory within these limits owned by or ceded to the United States of America. This effectively means if one, for purposes of revenue and taxation, proceeds in this state, they are actually doing so within federal territory under territorial jurisdiction of the United States of America, also known as the United States in all capital letters. And don't forget, everything is about revenue and taxation, which we understand once we look at the word revenue as to re-venue, as in change venue from one jurisdiction to another jurisdiction. It is all about word play and smoke and mirrors. To add to the complexity of it all, we also have to understand that starting in the Civil War and post-war period, along with the creation of the corporate overlay, we have the parallel track of creating a system of military occupation of conquered territory and people. The defeated southern states were never allowed to return to the Union as free states. They were placed in the position of martial law districts overseen by the military conqueror, the United States, accomplished by the Reconstruction Acts starting in 1867. Something referred to as the Lieber Code was issued during the Civil War, in fact on April 24th, 1863, to establish the military rules for war on land and how conquered territories were to be managed and controlled. The Lieber Code then morphed into the 20th century equivalent on an international level through successful phases and treaties issued through conventions at The Hague World Court that defined who were enemy combatants, belligerents, and other rules for militarily occupied territories and people. A belligerent was defined in one such treaty in 1899 as one who took up arms to defend against an invading force on the land, as that treaty had to do with rules of war on land. This is a very key point to understand, as this will progressively be hidden in plain sight when we come to the understanding of what exactly is a man or woman who engages in commercial activities upon the field of battle, known as commerce. Another important point to consider is how the rules of engagement, war, on the high seas, controlled by a system of law called admiralty and maritime, were subtly integrated and hidden within the context of issues concerning war on the land. This is important because true law is rooted and sits on the land. Equity, as it concerns the rights of beneficiaries of trusts and estates, is also rooted in law and has to do with land and landed estates. True substantive rights, inherent unalienable, are held within one's standing in law and equity that is concurrent with one's standing on the land. Conversely, rules that control bankruptcy and bankrupts are those of the sea, as are civil systems of code and procedure. Additionally, by fine tricks of manipulative layering of symbol and language, the traditions of commerce and the law merchant were progressively morphed to include the sea of commerce and commercial vessels, and the commercial field of battle, so that eventually we became known within the post-bankruptcy civil and legal system as civilly dead, ghost-like apparitions that could only eat and drink, buy and sell, and pursue gainful enterprise as wraith-like beings operating on and through commercial franchise vessels, licensed to operate on the sea of commerce, controlled and controllable within rules of admiralty and bankruptcy, via millions of civil codes and rules of civil procedure. What a mouthful that is. Mouthful of water. Commercial solutions are no solutions at all. In the past 30 years, there have been many people in pursuit of solutions out of this mess. In the mid to late 1990s and into the 2000s and 2010s, a set of so-called solutions emerged that seemed to have all the answers within the commercial arena. These were known by various names such as acceptance for value, administrative processes, perfection of commercial liens, notarial protests, and secured party creditor. They were all based on the principles and understanding of the UCC system, in the presumption that that was the ultimate field in which remedy would be achieved. In many instances, the appearance of remedy was achieved and many went out on a circuit to teach and promote their knowledge and experience. Many thousands followed those leads, and unfortunately many of those ended up paying significant prices in terms of time, money, and freedom, as one by one each alleged remedy became another quicksand pit of consequences. Even today, the internet is rife with websites promoting many so-called solutions, even though most of the originators of such ended up in prison. What they all failed to comprehend was the fatal flaws hidden within the fabric of commercial processes. These fatal flaws had to do with the deeper layers of the system, having to do with bankruptcy, admiralty, civil procedures, commercial construction, debtor-creditor relations, international treaties, definitions of enemy and belligerent status, and the true nature of commerce as defined herein. In short, it all gets down to three important words: status, standing, and capacity. Which we will thoroughly explore and define in this document. We have discussed the normal status that almost all beings hold at this time, that of bonded surety to a bankrupt franchise. The United States system is the linchpin and is mostly the focus of this paper, but the same is true with variations in every nation of the world. All are in fact corporations, channeled through the U.S. securities system. All are bankrupt. All have central banks of issue that issue monetized debt that bonds the people as sureties and perpetual debt service slaves. The word status is derived from the same etymological roots as the words state, estate, statute, and static. Each one of us is considered a state in fact. In static/fixed form, like a statue frozen in time. with property titles attached thereto as an estate. All property and land in this world is held in and as estates. We will return to this key and central point later in our discussion. For now, just understand that we all have a status, and that defines the elements of the estate associated thereto. And in most cases, our status is that of a bonded surety to a bankrupt franchise. In that status, the estate is known as a decedent, which is literally defined as one who is dying. If one looks in a modern dictionary, a decedent is generally regarded as one who has died, but the original definition remains as one who is dying. Thus, it is always important to not simply accept how a term is generally used or defined. The original and literal definition has not been removed, only overlaid, and is still operative, especially when used in a legal context. Standing has to do with inherent capacity when it comes to law, or the lack thereof. As a bankrupt, we are considered to lack standing to state a claim. This is evidenced by the continuous use of federal rules of civil procedure, Rule 12b-6 by the courts to dismiss any cases on the simple grounds per said rule that the case is dismissed for failure to state a claim upon which relief can be granted. This is also reflected in state rules of procedure. Additionally, there is a parallel set titled Federal Rules of Civil Procedure that makes it apparent that there is a difference, but when we dig deeper, we find that in fact it is all a matter of commercial transgressions. We also do not have any access to true common law with that status, and therefore cannot bring a court of record pursuant to the common law with the status of a bankrupt. All rights, property, and titles are based on the inherent right to state a claim, so as a bankrupt we have forfeited that right and thus have no standing in law, nor the capacity to claim the hidden equitable rights, values, and interests attached to the underlying ancestral/lineal estate. Such rights are held by the beneficiary and heir to the estate. However, in our current status as a bonded surety, we are considered to have abandoned our true estate. See detail of the two estates in Part 3. When there is substance in the standing of the heir, he or she, although traditional right of inheritance was only attributed to the male, but since we are forging new ground entirely, we decree that all beings, male and female, have such equal rights. Is considered a living beneficiary. Let's try reading that without the parentheses. When there is substance in the standing of the heir, he or she is considered a living beneficiary, as they are not civilly dead. But the lack of standing due to being the bonded surety to a bankrupt franchise places us as civilly dead in the system, and thus we can only have limited beneficial use of that property that effectively belongs to another who holds superior title. Without standing, one cannot claim rights, stand on the land, or have access to law or equity in the truest sense of those terms. With impaired bankrupt status and lack of standing, we therefore have no capacity. Capacity is the inherent power to assert authority and control over property, land, laws, rights, and essentially the substance of life. Our current status as bonded sureties without standing leaves us bereft of any real capacity, any real freedom, or any control over our lives. So obviously he's speaking from the perspective of this legal system. I mean, the perspective that we are, it's like an ongoing conversation, a record that's evolving. It's thoughts on paper, I suppose. The way that cases are tried in the courts that we have these days. And so my purpose with this information is, well, to open some doors about thinking in this direction and start to ask some questions which lead us into understanding the way things are. And then, as with this document, we'll go into more solutions, and the like Kenneth Scott, the House Cousins proposed direction that he says people need to go in to liberate themselves from this system of bondage. And so it's interesting perspective for me. It was foundational going into this realm of thinking towards freedom, absolute, as he calls it. People call it sovereignty. And the reason he doesn't say sovereignty is I think that has more to do with a state. But then in this part